Next, we're going to talk about planting into sod, which is another option, of course, when you're looking at doing grassland restoration. So Owen McElroy will be giving us some pointers and some experiences he's had from doing that.
I believe so, yep. Well, you guys already dipped into 10 minutes of my time. I thought from yesterday when I said I didn't like to talk, and then I went over my time frame, you guys would have learned your lesson a little bit. So hopefully I get us back on track, but I'll probably get long-winded again. So this is planting into sod, right? This is just a different alternative than to cropping some acres if you were looking to take, let's say, a brome field and make it something a little bit more productive. So the first thing you want to do when planting into sod is, try to figure out what you actually have, right? If you have native sod and it's a very diverse prairie, you probably shouldn't do anything with it because you can't get any more productive than what that picture is right there, right? We can't design a seed mix better than what Mother Nature already has provided for us. So what I usually say is do something different with the management that you've been doing to see what you actually have. Throw a prescribed fire out there. Throw some cattle out there. If you're going to throw cattle out there, almost go to the point where you abuse that grass. Like, take it down to the ground. Disturb that soil a little bit. See what you have. Is it native prairie that's heavily invaded? There's a lot of reasons why things get invaded. A lot of times it's because of it just being stagnant and not being managed still. So just see, do something different, see what you got. So, or do you have old previously farm ground that, people tried to farm, in the early, like 1930s or something, and they're like, oh, we can't do this, and it just went back. Some of that, the ground is still pretty productive, and if you change your management, you might actually see a lot of good stuff come back. Or is it old CRP? Was it planted to a grass planting already, and it just kind of got choked in with brome? Those are all things to think about. So native sod, like I said, do something different, give it a chance, change practices, like I said. If things aren't really coming the way you want it, there's options, right? We can overseed grass on that and then incorporate cattle to try to get stuff established. I'll talk about that a little later. If nothing changes with a change in management, okay, let's make a change then. You remove the vegetation, you do some herbicide treatments, and you drill right into that sod. Now, if it was previously farm ground, we might have a little bit more options. So if you look at your, like this is a old farming history map, I think you can get at the FSA office. You can see where up on that north side of up on the top of that red square, that ground's been previously farmed, right? So we have more options in our eyes. If that ground is super rough, we will probably break it up and farm it. Now, if it's smooth, we are perfectly fine going in and just planting right into the sod after we spray things out. But usually we go into the farming standpoint because our ground is extremely rough, and it's just so much better when you smooth it out farming it. But the reason why we go to the sod seeding thing mainly is because we got a faster turnaround, right? When you farm ground to prep it for a grass planting, most people tend to farm it for 3 to 5 years. So with these sod seedings, we can go from 1 year of being, of that prepping instead of that 3 to 5, and then we can get, grass growing right away. So here's the prep for preparing it for a sod seeding, right? So we talked about all the management practices earlier, and they can all be used to prep for a sod seeding. We can go remove the vegetation with burning, with grazing, or haying. Typically, it's easier for us to go in there and have somebody hay it. So the biggest thing about removing existing vegetation is we like to do it early. We don't wait until the typical, August 1st or July 15th timeframe. We try to get in there early, mid-June, so we can get 2 applications of herbicide. Usually when you're doing fire, it's early, same with grazing. So the key is, get that vegetation removed early so you can maybe get two applications to try to kill that brome out. Typically when we're spraying, we're just usually using Roundup or glyphosate. There are other herbicides that you could use to try to help yourself out or hurt yourself, depending on how you look at it. We have used Plateau in the past. It kind of does a very good job of maybe helping to hold down those cool season grasses a little bit more. It also does a good job of holding down annual grasses like foxtail. If you think you're going to have a thistle problem and you want to try to combat that on the front end, you can spray chemicals like 2,4-D or dicamba, but just know that you might have some residual issues. From my understanding, those chemicals don't stay in or on the ground for much more than 2 weeks. So chemicals like Milestone, it does have residual, 12 plus months. We've experimented with it before where we used it as a pre-emergent the fall before, and we had more thistle in that planting than we've ever had before. So it really doesn't much matter. As far as I don't think you can use it as a pre-emergent, and we haven't had success with it. So the 2,4-D and dicamba, we usually don't use dicamba, but we usually have co-ops spray these things out for us because we just don't do a good job ourselves. I mean, this is a perfect example of us spraying on the bottom. We just can't spray in straight lines for some reason. We're not very smart. So co-ops do a lot better job. And he sprayed dicamba for us this fall last fall on a planting, and I was like, I'm not really a fan of that chemical, but he said it had less residual than 2,4-D. So I don't know. When we came to the planting the following year, we did see what looked like some herbicide carryover with some of the plants that were growing back. I can't really say if that was because of the dicamba or if it was just because we hit a growing plant the previous year with Roundup. You would be surprised the amount that these native plants can tolerate Roundup, especially grasses. And that's why, with some of these old CRP plantings, you'll see a lot of your native grasses come back after spraying Roundup on them. When we do a fall planting, we typically spray in July and October. If for some reason we weren't able to get it planted in the fall and have to plant it in the spring, we usually like just to wait long enough to where we can get another application of Roundup on it. There's an example of a plateau herbicide treatment that, since the GFP can't spray correctly, we miss half the field for some reason. Perfect line of warm season grasses coming back, right? So we sprayed out an old planting that was dominated by brome, and we were going to replant into it. And this is just an example of what, plateau herbicide can do. It just kept that foxtail in check, left the ground a little bit more open, and provided, opportunity for seedlings to grow a little bit better. So whenever we do a sod seeding, we're always using, I'd say most of the time we're using our drill, right? So it allows for better seed to soil contact with that trash that's typically on on the ground yet when you're planting. So when we do these sod seedings, our main goal is to take our mainly brome dominated fields and try to get diversity back into them, right? Now that picture on the top, people will look at that and be like, wow, that's a disaster. And these look like this a lot of times when you plant them. You get some native plants growing back right away, and you get a big flush of thistle. But from a wildlife standpoint, I'll tell you right now that thistle field with warm season grasses growing in it is a lot more beneficial to wildlife than just a stagnant stand of brome. But as we'll talk about later, you can't just let thistle, buck, and you're going to have a lot of angry neighbors at you and stuff like that. So whenever you do these sod seedings, you are still in the same boat on which Brett will talk about later on post management and on planning, right? We're still going to have to probably clip these, for a year or two to try to get the stuff we planted established. But it does work, right? These other pictures are all sod seedings that we did. Sometimes we're starting to do some of these seedings into grass plantings that we planted early that were dominated by warm season grasses, just to try to get forb growth in them because they didn't have any before. Like that middle picture on the bottom, that is a perfect example of us just adding forbs into a warm season grassland. So pretty early. We don't know what the long term for those type of plantings are, but some of the early showing forbs, we do get those established right away. We'll see if we get some of the long, like after a couple years, if we still have the forbs around or not. So it's all a wait and see game, but it is doable, and we've had a lot of success. I don't have an actual. I talked about a mixture that we kind of use in these seedings. We typically go heavy on the warm season grasses, and we go heavy on a select number of aggressive forbs. So 10 to 12 forbs, probably 6 to 8 grasses. But super aggressive, super heavy is what we're trying to take that brome field and make it into something different quickly. So we know the brome's going to come back and be a competitor, but from what we've seen so far, by changing the dynamics of the plant community, it holds on pretty well. So this is an example of one of the sod seedings that we did a couple years ago. I won't talk about the prep. It took us a couple years to get it planted because we were dealing with the shouldn't really call out any names, but this was a WRP. So we really don't have complete control even on our property when it's in a WRP. So we had to follow certain things too, and we weren't planting it. A contractor was planting it because it was going through a government program to get it more diverse. So this was a very, very old CRP planting, right? So even though we sprayed it out and you didn't really see much for a whole lot of warm season grasses, these are all the warm season grasses that are coming back just on their own. We didn't plant those. It was just switchgrass that was coming back from the original planting. So when you spray Roundup on these plantings and you kill the brome, you actually expose a lot of the stuff that was still there and growing. Oh. So here's pictures of that same GPA, right? This is a previously farmed area. We've got records of it being previously farmed. It was tiled. It was ditched. And when we kill out the brome and reed canary grass, well, you got all these natives that pop up, right? And this is something that you will probably limit coming back if you decide to plow it and crop it for a couple of years. None of these flowers here were in our seed mix that we planted, especially not the orchid. That was a big surprise. We weren't expecting that at all. But by removing that brome competition, it just had time to express itself. Okay, switching gears a little bit. So we just talked about planting into sod. Now I'm just going to talk a little bit about planting onto sod. This is something that we've been doing for a few years now with the game fish and parks, and we've had pretty good success with it, right? Here's my transformation equation, I call it. So you take a smooth brome field, you add cattle to it, you add warm season grasses that you harvested. You do it for about 2 years, depending on how degraded your grassland was. And then, it equals a pretty good stand of warm season grass. You might have to add a fire in there or not. We've had success with fire and without fire. It kind of shows you the prior field, solid brome, shows you how we use our cattle as a tool, and we beat it down. Like, we expose soil when we use cattle this way. We overseed it with our Vicon, with big blue stem we harvest from a nearby planting. We'll go harvest the seed in the fall, and we'll just go throw it right out on top the same day when we harvest it. And then we usually get a pretty thick stand of grass. Now, is this a whole lot more productive for wildlife? You just change a brome field to, just a solid stand of big blue and maybe some switch. Maybe not. It's, probably debatable. But as far as our user standpoint, it's a lot more beneficial for our sportsmen and women to go utilize this grass, out hunting pheasants and stuff. So, I can show you guys pictures all the time and be like, yeah, it works all the time. But these pictures are actual proof that it works, right? So these are the typical GFP skips, like I said. Like, we can't ever do anything in straight enough lines or good overlap on anything. So you can see on both pictures where the Vicon did not overlap good enough, and we did not get a take in our warm season grasses. So by incorporating that seed we harvest, and we throw a lot of seed out there, don't get me wrong. We harvest it. It's free seed to us. We harvest it from our plantings. We put it right on top. Well, not only from the plantings, I guess. We have harvested it from native sites too, and that one on the bottom is actually from a native grassland that we harvest. So we've had luck on both ends, but we do throw a lot of grass out there. We use the cattle to incorporate the seed, and we've had very success getting big blue stem established on these areas. We kind of talked about organic and staying away from chemicals. People have done it. This is a seed plot that Prairie Moon did. So they wanted it to be organic, so they couldn't use chemical, but it's a lot less. It's a lot more work post planting to get something established. So they went in, they burned a brome field off, they planted into it, and then they had to burn it the next 5 years to get all this established. So it's a lot more work on the post planting, and if you are trying to be organic, but it can be done. That's all I got. I know the stuff I'm talking about, areas in the Northeast. I truly believe that we could probably do this anywhere, depending on what your dominant grass is on the landscape, right? So if it's western wheatgrass and you have it available to harvest or purchase, we typically harvest our own seed to do these plantings because we don't want to spend money, but we've had a couple plantings that we did where we overseeded purchase seed, and we've got that to establish too. But I think the cattle is a really big component on getting these things established. We've actually had some decent take of forbs also in these plantings. We don't spend a whole lot of money on expensive forbs when it comes to these plantings. We typically go with like really cheap, if you will. I don't really want to call them weedy species, but stuff like like vervain and prairie coneflower and stuff like that seem to establish well on their own too. But and we seem to have some pretty decent luck with it. So okay, we're gonna have questions after the next presentation, right?
We do, but if anyone has a question now, they can sure ask it, because I know I've pushed everything back for 10 minutes. We've
All
got
right.
plenty of time.
Man,
So if someone does have a question right away,
Okay.
we can answer it.
Questions?
You just want to talk about the timing of the grazing as far as establishing these?
Oh yeah. Good call. So we're trying to establish a warm season planting when we're doing this overseeding, right? So typically when we're grazing, it's going to be early spring. Probably anywhere from, in our country, that April 15th till about June 15th. So we typically pull them June 15th, because that's when your warm season grasses would start to grow, and we don't want the cattle nipping off newly growing warm season plants. So.
Owen, have you used fire and grazing on native sod to prep for overseeding?
Yes. Well, not in a combination, I guess. But we've used both tools by themselves. Fire does a lot better job of probably taking the duff or the trash away. It probably provides a better seed bed. But with our department anyways, we have so many priority burns that we want to get taken care of that we typically will try to utilize a tenant or a farmer to hay it, just because it's more readily available. With the grazing thing, there's some debate on whether that cow patty, if it's not breaking down properly, will prevent stuff from coming up. I really haven't seen it. I wouldn't be afraid to use cattle too, as long as you take that vegetation and open up the ground quite a bit.
When you're applying herbicide, do you feel like you're trying to kill the brome or just set it back?
We're trying to kill it. And that's why we're using Roundup, right? So we're definitely killing it, but I would say that you're going to expect it back, because the amount of seed that's still probably in the soil is quite a bit. But our goal is to get something established quick enough that it's going to compete with that. Oh, so what he asked was, are we trying to kill the brome with the herbicide treatment that we're doing? And yes, we are, and that's why we're trying to apply it even twice. And if we're going for a spring planting, maybe even 3 times,
Question on flexibility of your planting. You said you harvested your big blue, and then you would just plant right out of the box. Can you wait and plant when there's snow?
Yeah. We just, we're limited on the space we have, and the amount of bulk harvest that we can have, we just don't have really the room to store it. And a lot of times we have grass available to harvest nearby these areas that we want to treat with this treatment. So it's just easier for us just to go right from the source and get it planted. We're basically seeding it the same time Mother Nature would, earlier than we typically would if we were doing a planting, but we just don't really have the room to store that seed.
I'm a big proponent on the cattle and seeding stuff in there. I've been doing it on my own for a while, and then with work with other producers as well. And the forbs has always worked great. I think it's less, because thistles are a thing that everybody worries about. It's just always, what are the thistles going to do? I think you have less of that under this situation, and you get back to, with me, it's habitat with most of my producers, right? So it gets back to that sooner rather than a 2 to 3 to whatever year it takes to get. But my question I was going to ask you is, when you're doing that seeding, are you doing it before you put the cows out there, while they're out there? I guess my thing has always been, about in the middle, but
Yeah, pretty similar. We typically will go graze hard before we plant. So we'll do an early spring graze, open that ground up really hard. The way we always say it is, if you have foxtail show up, you usually graze it hard enough, and then we'll overseed that fall, and then come back and graze it again in the spring. And usually 2 cattle treatments, so 2 years before we look at trying to do either like a burn or anything after that. But you usually start to see these warm seasons pop up pretty early. So, but definitely in the middle. Yeah, you want to open that ground up before you throw that seed down.
Quick question, when you're overseeding, do you use a different rate than if it was a nice black field, or is it
Yeah, heavy as shit.
I want to repeat that.
He asked if we're overseeding on I assume on these sod plantings, do you go at a heavy rate? And we're not really scientific with it, so we're harvesting a lot and we're throwing a lot out. We are clearly we don't do a very good job, but a lot of times we're trying to overlap almost 1.5 times. So we almost want that seed going into the track that we made the last round. So it's going on really heavy, but it's available to us, right? If we're planting it from a purchase seed, I'm still going heavy, but I'm not busting the bank to do it, because with these type of plantings, there's a lot more variables in it to where it might not take. So we just don't want to put a heavy investment into something that may or may not take, but we've had a lot of luck doing it.
I'm just thinking if we're doing it for programs or if we have a standard rate, we would do it, or we have to double our rate.
Yeah, I would say you definitely want to go probably double. I would say that would be sufficient. The thing I always was kind of hoping for is we have all these CRP fields around, and I'm like, if we could just get the harvest equipment to harvest these CRP fields, and then you could just transfer it, then you're not even buying it, you're just taking the seed that you guys already invested in, and we're seeding more ground with it. But maybe that's just a pipe dream for the future.